I want to start today with a specific provocation. We tend to view our retirement accounts, our property, as assets, wealth we've stored. But if we look at the structural history of economics, those aren't assets. They are essentially pending liabilities that the system just hasn't extracted from you yet.
Wow. Okay, that is a terrifying way to open the show. You're effectively telling our listeners that their life savings are just a temporary illusion. But before we spiral, welcome to the debate. Today, we are looking at the economic model of the Barbary slave trade to answer a very modern question. Did the logic of piracy actually, disappear in the 19th century, or did it just evolve into what we now call finance?
Precisely. My position is that the Barbary trade, which operated out of North Africa from the 16th to the 19th century, was not just a series of tragic crimes. It was a rigorous economic system. Over 1 million Europeans were captured, but the key is how they were processed. They were either energy resources used to row galleys, or they were financial assets held for ransom. My argument is that this structure, viewing human beings strictly as fuel or as leverage, is a persistent feature of our economy, not some historical anomaly we left behind.
And here's where I really have to draw the line. I mean, while the Barbary trade was certainly an economic engine, equating it with modern democratic capitalism is just a massive category error. We've moved from a system of arbitrary violence to a system of law, of contract and consent. I argue that the evolution from the Barbary Coast to Wall Street represents a fundamental shift in human rights. Equating a 401k with being chained to a bench, it minimizes the actual brutality of the past.
Well, let's test that fundamental shift. You believe piracy ended because Western powers, specifically France and the US, developed a moral conscience. But if you actually look at the data surrounding the 1830 French invasion of Algiers, it wasn't a moral crusade. It was a cold cost-benefit analysis. For centuries, paying tribute, which was essentially protection money, was mathematically cheaper than waging war. When the cost of war finally dropped below the cost of tribute, France invaded.
Okay, but even if the motive was financial, the outcome was the cessation of the slave trade. That is progress.
Was it progress, or was it a hostile takeover? The state is effectively a large-scale extractor of resources. In 1830, the state simply eliminated the pirate, a small-scale extractor, so it could monopolize that extraction.
No, I think that is far too cynical. You're describing the state as just a bigger pirate, but the state provides public goods, infrastructure, defense, legal recourse. The Barbary corsairs provided nothing but fear. There is a massive difference between taxation for the common good and ransom for personal profit.
But is there a difference in the mechanism or just in the marketing? Let's look at the algorithm. Stealing, transferring wealth by force or by leverage, is always more energy efficient than producing, which, it requires time, labor, or raw materials. That code still runs our world. Look at modern rent-seeking behavior, where entities extract wealth without creating new wealth. When financial institutions generate massive returns through compounded interest or dividends without actually producing a product, that is simply the ransom system optimized. It's a cleaner extraction, sure, no chains, but the flow of value is the same, from the laborer to the asset holder.
I have to strongly disagree with that characterization. I mean, finance is the allocation of risk and capital. People who build companies or invest their savings are providing the necessary fuel for innovation. To call that theft or ransom, it just ignores the risk they take. You're completely glossing over the concept of value creation. A merchant in 1700 feared being physically snatched. A worker today might fear inflation or market downturns, but they are not physical property. That distinction is the foundation of a free society.
The distinction matters to the individual, absolutely. But it doesn't matter to the system architecture. And this is where we hit the fatal error in the code. The looting model, whether it's piracy or colonial expansion, it requires an infinite outside, a frontier to plunder. The Barbary Pirates had the open sea, the colonizers had the New World.
And today?
Today, Earth is a closed system. It's a spaceship. There is no outside left to extract from. If we continue running an operating system designed for growth via extraction inside a sealed container, the result isn't profit, it's a system crash. We are seeing those error messages right now in environmental degradation and resource depletion.
And that brings us to the crux of the anxiety people feel. If the current model creates wealth by consuming the future, and we're out of future to consume, well, what is the alternative? We can't just stop the economy. That leads to starvation and chaos. We need a way to transition that doesn't involve collapse.
Looking for a comfortable transition is often a distraction. The anxiety you're describing is a signal that the math no longer works, and it often leads people to vote for demagogues promising impossible returns, rather than facing the physics of the situation.
So where does that leave us? I mean, you can't just diagnose a terminal illness and then walk away. There has to be a constructive path forward.
The only survival strategy is what I call verification capability. We have to stop accepting labels like justice or profit at face value. You have to trace the physical flows of energy and resources. If the math doesn't work in a closed system, the system will fail regardless of how civilized our laws claim we are.
That is a terrifyingly pragmatic place to leave it. Essentially, you're arguing that we are trapped in an extraction loop that is running out of fuel, and our laws are just window dressing.
And you were arguing that institutions can evolve to manage the scarcity. I suppose we will see which calculation holds up.
Indeed. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening to the debate.
Verification is key. Goodbye.